HarperCollins presents The River Maid by Dilly Court, read by Annie Aldington. Chapter 1. Limehouse Hole, London, 1854. Essie Chapman pulled hard on the sculls as she rowed her father's boat towards Dukeshore Dock. It was dark, and the lantern on the stern of the small clinker-built craft bobbed up and down, shedding its light on the turbulent waters of the River Thames. Essie fought against the tide and the treacherous undercurrents, as she was cold, wet, and close to exhaustion. Her mysterious passenger had not spoken a word since she collected him from the foreign vessel moored downriver. The task would normally have fallen to her father, Jacob, but he was laid up, having slipped on the waterman's steps the previous evening. He had fallen badly, and had been carried home to White's Rents on an old door, the only form of stretcher available to the Wharfinger's men at the time. He had lain on the sofa like a dead man for 24 hours, and when he awakened he could barely move a muscle. "You'll have to do my next job for me, Essie, love. It's a matter of life and death." His words echoed in her mind as she battled against the elements. By day, Jacob's small craft scurried up and down the river, doing errands considered too small by the lightermen and watermen. But by night things were different. Sometimes it was the odd barrel or two of brandy that had to be sneaked ashore before the revenue men laid hands on it, or packets wrapped in oilskin, the contents of which would forever remain a mystery. There was always a messenger waiting on the shore to grab the cargo and spirit it off into the darkness. Money changed hands, and Jacob would spend most of it in the bunch of grapes, coming home reeking of rum and tobacco smoke. Sometimes, when he felt generous, he would give Essie twopence to spend on herself, but the money was usually spent on necessities like bread, coal and candles. The tide would turn very soon, and Essie was anxious to reach the shore before the current took her downriver. She shot a furtive glance at her passenger, who was wrapped in a boat cloak that made him merge into the darkness. His face was concealed by the hood, and she could not tell whether he was young or old, although his lithe movements when he had climbed down the ship's ladder and boarded her boat suggested that he was in the prime of life. Getting him to dry land was uppermost in her mind, and she put every ounce of strength into a last supreme effort to reach the wharf. The sound of the keel grating on gravel was like music to her ears, although it was as much as she could do to rise from her cramped position. Then, to her surprise, her passenger was on his feet and had stepped over the side, wading ankle-deep in water as he dragged the craft effortlessly onto the mud and shingle. The top of the wharf towered above them, menacing even by moonlight. The great skeletal ironwork of the cranes was silhouetted against the black velvet sky, and an eerie silence hung in the still air, punctuated only by the slapping and sucking of the water against the wooden stanchions. It had to be well after midnight, and yet the river was still alive with wherries, barges and larger vessels heading for the wharves and docks further upstream. It was slack water, and soon the tide would turn, and the river would churn and boil as it flowed towards the coast. Jacob always said that river water ran in his veins instead of blood, and as a child Essie had believed every word her father said. But now she was a grown woman of 20, and she was not so gullible. She stood up, but before she had a chance to clamber ashore, the stranger leaned over and lifted her from the boat as easily as if she were a featherweight. She was acutely aware of his body heat and the scent of spicy cologne mixed with the salty tang of the sea. Most men of her acquaintance stank of sweat, tar and tobacco, but this was altogether different and oddly exciting. She had barely had time to catch her breath when he set her down on the ground, pressed a small leather pouch into her hand, and without a word of thanks he strode off, heading in the direction of the stone steps. Driven by curiosity, Essie hurried after him, although her progress was hampered by her damp skirts and flannel petticoat. She reached the top of the steps in time to see him climb into a waiting
Sample complete. Ready to continue?